It is now indeed an honor to introduce our afternoon keynote speaker, Pierre Cleroux, Chief Economist and Vice President Research. He is no stranger to this crowd. He ranks amongst your top favorite speakers. Sorry, ministers, I'm sorry. But every time, when can we have Pierre back? So the doormat is always out for you, Pierre, okay? I viewed a video from his last presentation in 2022, and I must say, you nailed it. And when it came to predicting what was ahead, not a recession, because I had said the R word and you said no. So I'm interested today in the way of what we've got ahead in our economic outlook as we enter another interesting time globally and with our trading partner to the south. Please join me in welcoming Pierre Cleroux, to the Leeds Grenville Economic Development Center.
Thank you.
Pierre's going down below.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction. Thank you for your invitation again this year. I'm very happy to be here. I think you will agree with me. There's a lot going on about the economy, so it's a good time to talk about the economy. I would say the crystal ball is a bit more foggy this time around. Just in the last 3 weeks, we had an election in the US. We are not sure what will be the impact on Canada. I'm going to talk about that. Interest rates keep going down. And a few weeks ago, the Canadian government announced new rules on immigration. So this is a lot going on for the economy. Last time I was here, the debate was, are we going to have a recession or not? And I was lucky, we didn't have one. This time around, it's not about a recession. We don't think, not a lot of economists believe we're going into a recession, but there are some challenges. And I'm just, the title is, Canada is actually in the middle of this soft landing. We didn't have a recession, but the economy did slow down as interest rates went down. So growth is quite soft. But the good news is we are at the end of this economic cycle. We're starting a new economic cycle that should bring lower interest rate, lower inflation, and better growth. So in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to try to convince you of that. And hopefully, and we'll have plenty of time of questions so you can challenge me as well. So the first part, I'm going to talk about the Canadian economy, interest rate, inflation, what we should expect. I'm going to come back to Ontario. And finally, I'm going to talk about what should we expect as our business environment for the next 5 years. Not only for the next few months, but what should we expect for the next 5 years. So let's start with the Canadian economy. As you know, the Bank of Canada has increased interest rate in 2022. We can see it on the slide. This is the shaded area. And what happened when you increase interest rate? Well, people pay more for their mortgages and for their car loans or for any loans they have. And actually, Canadians today are paying $77 billion more in interest payment alone. $77 billion more money than 2 years ago. So it's like you withdraw from the Canadian economy about $80 billion. So this is not a surprise that the economy slowed down. This is actually what the Bank of Canada wanted to do. They wanted to bring inflation down. In order to do that, you have to slow down the economy. So by increasing interest rate, after a while, if you look at the graph, you can see that the reaction of the economy is not immediate. But after 6 to 8 months, the economy started to slow down. It takes some time before people renew their mortgage. So it's not just when people renew their mortgage or their car loans or any loans they have that the shock hit them. So when you pay much more at the end of the month, well, you have to make some decision. And the decision that Canadians have made have been on restaurant, on clothing. Restaurant business dropped by 20% over the last 2 years. Clothing sales in Canada dropped by 9% over the last 12 months. So that's how Canadians cope with higher interest rate. The good news is all this was to reduce inflation, and inflation went down from 8% in 2022 we're down to 2%, which is the objective of the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada target is 2% with a bracket between 1 and 3. Actually, we have been inside that bracket for the last 6 months. So we can say that the fight against inflation is done. Basically, we're back to price stability. So the reason why the banks, the central banks, and not only in Canada, in the US and other developed economies, they want price stability, it's because it's much better for business and for people. It's hard to manage a business when prices are fluctuating a lot, like in 2021, 2022. So hard, it's also very difficult for people. When inflation was at 8%, grocery inflation was between 12 and 15%. Very hard on people, especially on low-income people. So that's the reason why central banks, they like price stability, because they believe it's the best way for people and business to continue to grow. So we're back to that, and that's allowed the Bank of Canada to start reducing rate. They have cut their policy rate 4 times since June. So from 5% to 3.75. And we believe that we're not done. They are not done. They are going to continue to reduce the rate. What you see in red on the graph, it's our forecast at BDC. We believe the Bank of Canada will continue to reduce the rate because the fight against inflation is done, and also because the Canadian economy continues to slow down. So if you want to stop this slowdown, you have to give back money to consumers, and the way to do it for the Bank of Canada is to reduce rates. So we believe that the policy rate should be around 2.5% in the middle of 2025. So, and this will create some momentum in the economy. Just like the graph I show you, when you increase interest rate, the economy slows down. Well, the opposite is also true. When you reduce interest rate, people have more money to spend. It's going to take some time, it's going to have a lag, but the economy will come back. There's 2 headwinds to that. So this is a pretty positive picture, but there's 2 headwinds in Canada. The first one is the new announcement on immigration. The immigration has been increasing in Canada very significantly over the last few years. But the Canadian government just announced they are going to reduce the number of non-permanent residents in 2025 by 500,000 and another 500,000 in 2026. It's a headwind because when people come here, like we see in the graph, for example, over the last few years, this is good for the economy. There's some challenges to that, challenges for housing, healthcare. But for the economy, when people come, they need a place to stay. And they buy furniture, they buy a car, or they spend money. The opposite is true. If you reduce the number of people in Canada, and we're going to reduce it by 1 million in the next 2 years, well, of course, the economy will have some limitation. So first, headwinds for Canada. The second one is the election south of the border. This is Mr. Trump's economic agenda. We're not sure exactly what he's going to do because, as you know, he doesn't always do what he says. So we're not sure exactly what he's going to do, but this is the agenda. Some of these points are good for Canada. For example, tax cut. If he does reduce taxes like he did last time, this will stimulate the US economy, and by rebound, is going to help Canada. 78% of our export are going south of the border. 83% of Ontario export is going south of the border. So the US is huge for Canada. So that's why we are focusing on this so much. So the tax cut is actually positive for us. Second one, tariff. This is not positive. He said that he's going to increase tariff by 60% to China, 10 or 20%, sometimes he said 10, sometimes he said 20, on everybody else, including Canada and Mexico, despite the fact that we have a free trade agreement. So that's the big unknown. Is he going to do this? Because the downside to do this, when you increase tariff, you increase the price of your products inside your country. The US, just like Canada, doesn't produce clothing anymore, or there's a lot of food they don't produce. They don't produce they import a lot of products. So if you put tariff on these products, well, the cost of everything in the US is going to increase. So it doesn't really make sense. That's the reason why we believe that these tariffs are not going to be imposed totally. Maybe there will be some tariff on China. There's some dispute with Mexico. It might have few tariff on Mexico. But there's no need to impose a tariff on Canada. We have kind of a balanced trade between US and Canada. You know, the US have a $500 billion deficit with China, a trade deficit. That means that they import $500 billion more than they export to China. The trade deficit with Canada is $30 billion. It's true that we export a lot to the US. Actually, we export $450 billion. But we import almost the same amount. Canada is the #1 client for 21 states in the United States. So we have a fair trade between the two countries. So we still believe that Canada is going to be exempted from the 10%, especially that we have a free trade agreement. When you have a free trade agreement, you're not supposed to impose tariff. So it's hard to evaluate what will be the impact on Canada. The only example we have is Mr. Trump was elected, and during his mandate, he did impose 2 tariffs on Canada, one on steel and one on aluminum, but only for 12 months. And he withdrew them at the end of the renegotiation of the free trade agreement. During the first mandate of Mr. Trump, Canada continued to export. Actually, our export to the US continued to increase. Our growth continued to increase. And our business investment continued to increase. So the second mandate might be different, but at the same time, the only thing we can look at is the past. So this is something we check very closely, but so far the only thing we know, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty in the next 4 years. But at the end of the day, I think Canada is going to be able to cope with this new administration. So interest rates are going down, which is positive. Immigration regulations are changing, which is going to limit the growth. There's a lot of uncertainty about the US election. So what does it mean for Canada? Well, we believe despite all this, the economy will grow. We are at the middle of this soft landing. As interest rate is going down, we will see more growth in the economy. It's going to take some time, but we already see some positive sign about the Canadian economy. In some sectors, the economy is improving as interest rate is going down. So by the beginning of 2025, we should see more growth in the Canadian economy on 3 different fronts. The first one is on the consumer side. Consumers have been slowing down consumption over the last 2 years. As interest rate is going down, there's going to be more money in their pocket, and they should be able to spend more. One argument that is really make us really optimistic is this graph that you see. This is the number of savings that Canadians have in their bank account, not investment, just the money that they have in their bank account. They have $88 billion. This is 3 times the amount in 2019. So Canadians have been cautious. If you look in 2020, we had a record number, but 2020 was the pandemic. We couldn't go to restaurants, we couldn't travel, so it was a good time to save. As we're moving away from the pandemic, but the amount of savings went down, but we still have a very high level. This is not so surprising. Each time there's a slowdown in the economy or a recession, savings are moving up. People are more cautious. They don't know if they will keep their job. They will postpone some to buy some, for example, changing their cars. So this is actually a good position to be in. As interest rates are going down, as people are more confident about the economy, they have money to spend. Part of this money is going to go in the economy. Second positive thing is business investment are increasing. So they're still lower than before interest rate went down, but they have been increasing in the last 2 quarters. So confidence in the business world is coming back. So as interest rate continue to go down, we should do better in terms of business investment. Finally, our export continued to be very solid. Over the last few years, despite the fact that interest rate has been increasing around the world, also in the US, our export has been very resilient. So we believe that as interest rate is going down, well, the situation is just going to improve. So our forecast for this year is still soft growth, 1% growth for 2024. We're almost done. As interest rate is going down, we'll see more growth in the economy, and growth should be around 1.7% next year, just below the capacity or the potential of the Canadian economy, which is 2%. And the reason why we reduce our forecast is just because immigration law has changed, because the interest rate will stimulate the economy. So despite the two headwinds that I mentioned, the Canadian economy will perform better in 2025 than it did in 2024. One last comment on this graph. You see the full economic cycle that started with the pandemic. In 2020, major recession, our GDP dropped by 5%. We lost 3 million jobs. The recovery was very strong. Government spent money to help people and business. The Bank of Canada reduced rates. So we had two very good years in 21 and 22, way above the potential of the economy. That created inflation. So high inflation, the Bank of Canada increased interest rate. We had 2 years of slow growth. Finally, in 2025, we're going to rebalance the economy. After 5 years after the shock of the pandemic, we will have a more balanced economy in 2025. Lower interest rate, lower inflation, better growth. Not only we expect better growth, but more stable growth for the next few years. So in 2026, 2027, we should be close to the potential growth of the Canadian economy, around 2%. No longer having a roller coaster like we have experienced over the last few years. So that's a good news in itself. So this is the situation for Canada. Ontario's story is very similar because we are in the same country, and the biggest factor was higher interest rates. So higher interest rate also slowed down the Ontario economy. We can see it very clearly from this graph. When the Bank of Canada started to increase interest rate, the economy slowed down. Not all sectors slow down, but retail, as you can see from this graph, is down by about 7% compared to March 2022. So the reason for that is, like I said, for Canada, people pay more at the end of the month for their mortgage, for their car loans, and the debt level in Ontario is higher than the Canadian average. So these two provinces where debt is high, British Columbia and Ontario. So when you increase interest rates, you have a bigger impact on those two provinces. I'll give you an example. The average mortgage payment in BC is $3,000. That's the average. In Ontario, it's $2,200. I was in New Brunswick a few weeks ago, it was $1,200. So you can see when you increase interest rate, the impact on BC and Ontario is quite different than New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, or Saskatchewan. So that's the reason why retail dropped in Ontario more than in average in Canada. So what should we expect for the next 12 months? Well, there's four factors that are going to help the Ontario economy. First, lower interest rate. The disposable income is still very strong. A lot of investment in the automotive sector. And finally, better or more government spending. We can agree or disagree with that, but I will show you that it's positive for the economy. So the first factor, and by far the most important one, is interest rate. As interest rate is going down, there's going to be more money in the economy. We're starting to see that, for example, housing starts is increasing in Ontario for the first time since 2022. So we will continue to see improvement in construction because of lower interest rate. Same thing with consumption. We will see more retail sales in the next 12 months because of lower interest rate. An interesting factor is the fact that the disposable income in Ontario keep increasing. The disposable income is all the revenue that people are getting from salary, from investment, from pension, or even from government program, minus the tax that we pay. So that's basically the money people have to spend. If you look at this graph, you can see every single quarter over the last 3 years, the disposable income has increased in Ontario. The job market has been good. Salary has been increasing. So people have more money. The problem is they pay so much for, at the end of the month, for their mortgages that they didn't spend as much in retail. But the good news is as interest rate is going down, this money is going to be available for consumption. So that's why we are optimistic that consumption is going to come back with lower interest rate. The third factor I want to talk about is there's a lot of investment in the automotive sector. There's a transition in the automotive sector to electric vehicles. Look at this graph. You see a record level of investment in the province compared to the last decade. A number of examples, $15 billion for Honda electric vehicle, new plant, 3 major battery plants that are being built right now. So these investments are going to support the growth of the Ontario economy for the next decade. Finally, government spending has been increasing, which, like I said, we can debate on this, is it good or bad? But for an economist, this is actually stimulating the economy. When government spend more, well, the economy is actually growing more. There's a debt factor, but that's another story. So our forecast for Ontario is growth of 1.1% this year, similar to Canada, a little bit bigger, a little bit higher, and 1.7% for next year. So lower interest rate is going to help the economy of Ontario to grow. We'll see that mostly on the consumption side and also on the construction side. The last part of my presentation I want to talk is how our business environment is going to look like for the next 5 years. So the economy is going to grow. So we'll have better growth. The next 5 years, we'll see more growth in the economy than we saw in the last 5 years. But there's also going to be some challenges. One is the cost of operating a business is not going to go down. Shortage of labor is going to come back, and I'm going to explain why. And finally, and this is not negative, but we see that there's going to be an acceleration in technology adoption. So the first one, this is an index of the average cost of operating a business in Canada. As you can see in 2021, 2022, this cost has increased by 35%. This is huge. It took 20 years before to get to an increase of 35%. We did it in 2 years. So the pressure on businesses has been really, really big. And one of the reasons because of that is salaries. Salaries are still increasing at 5% in average every year. Much bigger increase than in the past because we still have a very tight job market. Despite the fact the economy slowed down in the last 12 months, salaries are still increasing by 5%. So the good news is these costs are not increasing anymore. Inflation is under control, but costs are not going to go back to 2019. So that's what we find in our research. The pressure on operating costs is going to remain. So that means that businesses have to find a way to continue to grow with this new cost environment, continue to be profitable in this new cost environment. The second trend that we see for the next 5 years is actually the labor shortages. We talked a lot about this in 2022, but actually in the last 12 months, the situation has eased out. In 2022, there was 400,000 vacant jobs in the province. That was a record. We never saw that before. In Canada, this number was 1 million. So imagine in 2022, there was 1 million vacant jobs in the country because we have this shortage of labor. So unfortunately, this situation is going to come back. There's 3 reasons for that. As the economy is growing again, the economy will create more jobs. So this is going to be difficult for the job market. The second is this issue we have is not going away. There's more and more Canadians retiring. In the last 12 months, more than 100,000 Canadians, or in this case, Ontarians, left the job market to retire. This is twice as much what we used to see in the economy. So this is the baby boomers. There's a lot of them, and they are getting close to 65. So they're leaving the job market massively. And that's the reason why we have this labor shortages. Like I said, it's not a new phenomena that people retired at 65. What is different now, there's many of them. So this is the reason why we're going to have the shortage of labor again as the economy picks up. is going to last until 2030. By the year 2030, all the baby boomers will be gone out of the job market. We'll see. But that means that the job market is going to rebalance. I have nothing against baby boomers, by the way. And the third reason why this shortage of labor is going to come back is because of new immigration limit. So the last few years, there was a lot of people coming to the country from outside, but these volume or the total number of immigrants is going to really go down in the next few years, and that will also make this shortage of labor even worse. So why am I talking about that? I don't want to depress you, but I want you to be aware of the challenge of operating a business in the next few years. And there's some solutions. We look at 2,000 Canadian businesses and we look at how they cope with the shortage of labor. We also look at the financial results. So the best strategies are on the board. And by the way, the first one is by far the winning strategy. Businesses who are investing in technology and automation, they perform better than others in the context of shortage of labor. Technology doesn't replace people, but it could replace tasks inside the business. A few weeks ago, I was in London visiting a client of BDC. They manufacture parts for the automotive sector. And I was really impressed when we visited the plant. The two owners had 40 different robots, and actually 40 people as well. And that's the reason they were able to grow, by investing in automation, because automation, doesn't require more people. And what I was really impressed by is they had banners in the plant. Last year, they produced 1 million parts. They have one default. Imagine 1 default on 1 million parts you make. The year before, they had 5. So robots are very precise, and they will do whatever you ask them to do, but they don't make mistakes. So it's great for quality. And also, the owner didn't say that, but I was amazed that the toughest part of the job, and when you manipulate steel and aluminum, and it's dangerous. But the most dangerous part of the job was done by robot. So this is also a great improvement. Second solution is to develop their own people. More and more businesses are hiring younger. They cannot find people with skills. So they hire people with low skills and they develop them internally. It's a great way to build your skills inside the company. It's a great way to retain your workers as well. And finally, as it's so difficult to recruit, we have to look at the job market differently than in the past. So the last point I want to make is technology adoption is going to accelerate. Technology adoption has been with us for a long time. In the last decade, it's amazing how businesses have been adopting technology. But according to our research we just completed, more and more businesses believe that technology will have an impact on their business for the next 5 years, much more than in the last 5 years. So entrepreneurs themselves believe that technology adoption is going to be key to their success. And we see it, 66% of small business are using AI today, twice as much as 12 months ago. We were shocked by this result. And we were even more shocked by the second result. 97% of business using AI, they are satisfied. We do a lot of survey at BDC. We never saw a result like this. We never see 97% of satisfaction. Even while we're very proud to say that 93% of our clients are satisfied with us. But 97%, it's even higher than that. It's amazing. And the reason why people are satisfied is because they said that AI is doing what they were planning to do. For example, reducing costs or forecasting something. On top of it, they are able to reduce their costs. So what they find is investing in AI is actually giving them more benefits, unexpected benefits. And I'm going to conclude on that, but give you 2 examples of clients of BDC that are using AI, because sometimes we believe you need to be a big company to use AI. The first one, 5 people. They are the headhunter. They have designed for them a software to find the right resume in all the resume they have. So something that somebody was able to do in few days, well, AI is doing it in few seconds. So when they receive a new mandate, let's say for a CFO in technology, well, AI will find the 10 top resume in few seconds. So they are saving a lot of time. The other one is even, I find even more interesting. It's a grocery store. And I never thought about this, but one of the challenges of grocery store is the amount of vegetable and fruit that you order, because you don't know how much you're going to sell. And you can have a lot of waste. So they have designed a software to forecast how much banana they're going to sell on Monday. They reduce their waste by 20%. So this is just an example of small business using AI today to make their business more efficient, better serve their clients, and also to reduce their costs. So in conclusion, we are at the end of this economic cycle that brought us higher interest rate. We're starting a new economic cycle with lower interest rate. Inflation is under control. We're going to have lower interest rate, better growth in the economy. Having said that, there's two headwinds that we're watching. New immigration regulations, but also what's going on south of the border. We still believe that Canada will fare well with the new election in the US, but definitely it's uncertainty that we have to take into account in our forecast. So I'm going to stop here. We'll be happy to take your questions. Oh, thank you.
Oh, you want cheers? We'll do drinks later.
Okay.
All righty. So we've got our people going out, and right beside you, Carol, we'll start you off there. And if you want a question, just make sure your hand goes up so we can see it big and bright. We've got lots of time for questions. There we go.
Monsieur Cleroux, merci beaucoup pour votre présentation. C'était vraiment intéressant. I'd like to introduce myself, everybody. I can officially announce today that I am your Liberal candidate for the next provincial election. And I think your speech today is really relevant and I think resonates to everybody in the room this afternoon, because I think there is reason to be concerned about the new administration. And I think there is reason for us to be concerned about our economy going forward because of that, but also because of some of the decisions we're making both in our province and nationally. So I have two questions for you, sir, that I would really appreciate. Just one? Okay. Okay. Well, maybe I'll get to the heart of one because it is very federally oriented, but does really relate to Ontario. Doug Ford just recently announced his decision to reach out to Trump and speak directly about excommunicating ourselves from Mexico. When for our productivity, if I'm not mistaken, we rely heavily on Mexico to keep our productivity costs down and our services available to Ontarians and Canadians. So I would be very interested in his decision and your observation of how we navigate the idea that a provincial leader immediately will go directly to the South at a very, very challenging time that Canada faces. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. It's an interesting question. I try to stay away from politics. So you're right. Mr. Ford said that. And Mr. Trudeau said the same thing. He said this week that Canada is not the problem for the U.S. Like I said before, we have a balanced trade between the U.S. and Canada. So Mr. Trudeau said as well that he would be, if need to be, he will be open to a free trade agreement only between Canada and the U.S. I think, first of all, I think this is a negotiation position. I think, I think everybody agree that the free trade agreement between the three countries would be better than two countries. But Canada has to provide arguments to stay away from the 10% tariff that Mr. Trump said he might impose. So this is a good negotiation position, saying that, the issue for the US trade is not Canada. We are a developed economies. Our salaries are comparable to the US. We're not cheap labor. We are also importing a lot from the US. So I agree. I understand why those two positions. In terms of, like I said, 83% of our export are going to the US. Only 4% are going to Mexico. So that's the reason why those two leaders are ready to make that shift. Because our number one market, by far, is the US. So what is important for the Canadian economy is to keep this relationship and this free tariff zone between the two countries. That's what the two leaders, I think that's the position they make, and they're trying to convince the US that what is important is Canada. So I think that's a negotiation position. We'll see what happens.
Yes, and I'm going to play devil's advocate, or maybe it's just the cynic in me. Okay, if you put a 60% tariff on China, and as China has done in the past, just change the label and it came from somewhere else, or it dumps it here and it finds its way across the border, how will that affect us? Would we get into trouble with the US if they did something like that? And how would we prevent them from doing something like that?
Yeah, very good question, because actually this is the center of the debate with Mexico. In the last free trade agreement, the three countries agree that they shouldn't be the link between China and the US. In Canada, there's a lot of regulations, and there's not a lot of products that are transiting by Canada, because we are, we have a rule of law, we are a sophisticated country, so we are able to intercept that, which is not the case in Mexico. So that's the reason why the US is upset with Mexico. They are saying, and I don't have proof, but they are saying that China is using Mexico to enter to the US. That's why they want to make a more regulation against Mexico. And that's the reason why Mr. Trudeau said that, we don't do that here. So don't take the two countries in the same position. So that's explaining a little bit the comment that we were talking about. It's because there's a perception from Canada, from the US, that China is using Mexico as enter to the US market. In Canada, we have enough regulations to prevent that.
And just over, Ari?
Yes, thank you, Pierre. Ari Hugenboom from Rideau Lakes. My question goes back to your comment about lower inflation means more consumption, okay? And my question is around, a lot of those people are, as I am, in the baby boomer stage. We have more disposable income, but does that necessarily mean we're going to be spending it, or are we going to be saving it? For example, investing in stocks, bonds, precious metals, GICs, things of that nature, because we tend to be a more conservative lot than I look at my own kids and my grandkids in terms of their spending patterns. Yeah. But I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. The baby boomers or people who are retiring are not the one who are going to spend a lot of money. The one that where interest rate will make a difference is since interest rate increase, a lot of people pay $600, $700, $800 more at the end of the month than 4 years ago. So those are the one who have restricted their spending. Or those one are not going to restaurant as much. So as interest rate is going down, these Canadians are going to get a little bit more money. They won't be squeezed as much. And that free money is going to go into the economy because they are at the age where they still spend a lot of money. So, you're perfectly right. Our older Canadians, they won't be the one who are going to spend a lot of money because they are at the period of time where they save money. But the one who are really negatively affected by higher interest rates, especially on their mortgages, they are the one that over time they will get a break, and this money is going to feed in the economy.
Super. Thank you. And speaking of mortgages,
Yeah, so my name is Tina Murray. I own a couple of businesses. One is a small retail convenience store locally, and then I'm also a mortgage agent. And so my question is specifically about that. You talk about lower interest rates, and yes, if you have a variable rate mortgage, yes, you have lower rates. But many people are on fixed rates, and they are not tied to the same markets. And so since Trump was elected, we've noticed a slight increase because of bond markets, and rates have gone up marginally. And correct me if I'm wrong, Karina is also in the mortgage industry, our esteemed warden. About 60% of mortgages over the next 2 years are coming up for renewal, and many of these people are in very low interest rates. So what's going to happen to those mortgages? If you're at a 1.8% mortgage and your mortgage is up for renewal next year, you're going to be at 4%. That doesn't equate to more money in my pocket.
Yeah. I don't disagree. That's why I said there's going to be a lag before we see the positive thing. I don't know if you remember the graph when the Bank of Canada increased interest rate, the economy didn't slow down right away because people took time. There's about 20% of Canadians renew their mortgage every year. So it took a year before we saw consumption to decline. The opposite is true. When you reduce interest rate, to your point, a lot of Canadians, if you sign your mortgage yesterday, the fact that the interest rate is going down, it doesn't, if you have a fixed rate, it won't affect you. But as we are moving away and going down in terms of interest rate, more and more Canadians will have more money. There's 38% of Canadians who have a flexible rate. So they see the benefits right away. There's another 35% of Canadians who have to renew their mortgage, so that they will be negatively affected. But as we move away from higher rate, you will see more people renegotiating their mortgage with a lower interest rate. So it's going to take some time. And that's the reason why we don't see, interest rate has been going down 4 times since June. We haven't seen a big pickup in the economy. We're starting to see housing sales in October. We had a very high number. We believe it's just the beginning. And in 2025, this market is going to pick up again. And as we move away, people will have more money in their pocket. There's mortgages, there's also car loans, there's also line of credit. People have a lot of Canadians have a line of credit. So it's going to take some time before we see the real benefit of that.
so the question is, what's going to be the call on the interest rate draw?
50 basis points or 25?
I think it's going to be 25. Because the idea for the Bank of Canada is you want to reduce the rate, but you don't want to go too fast to create distortions. So we'll see, but I would be surprised if they go 50 basis points a second time in a row. They might do it in 2025. $20 bet. $20 bet. Yeah, I agree with that.
And we got a question right up at the front here.
All right, so your slide on real GDP was looking positive, but if you look at real GDP per capita, the picture is not as pretty. And furthermore, if you look at productivity, especially as we compare to the US, that's also not as pretty. So I was hoping for a comment, what our country can do to kind of look to solve those challenges.
Very good question. You're right. The GDP per capita is going down. And GDP per capita is it's an indicator of wealth. So we use it between countries to compare wealth. And but over the last 2 years, our GDP per capita went down. But our GDP slowed down because of a higher interest rate, and we had 1 million immigrants every year. So the population increased. So the ratio of GDP on population has been decreasing. So I'm not too concerned about that because in the short term, there's a good explanation for that. If in 5 years our GDP per capita continues to decline, which won't be the case, I think, but if it continues to decline, that would be really worrisome. But for now, it's the fact that when you increase interest rates, you know that the economy will slow down. And at the same time, if you bring so many immigrants at the same time, for example, the government decided to reduce the number of Canadians by 1 million in the next 2 years. Well, our GDP per capita will increase. So so you have to look this at more long term. Second question was on productivity. And you're perfectly right. Our productivity in Canada has not increased since 2019. We are the only G7 countries where the productivity has not increased. There's a conjunctural reason. Canadian businesses, they see their business as a family. So even if their sales slow down, they kept their people. And we see that in every recession. Very different than Americans. Americans, when the economy slows down, they fire everybody. Not everybody, but they fire people. Here in Canada, over the last 2 years, as the economy slowed down, has a lot of businesses, they haven't seen their revenue increase. They kept their people because they don't want to fire people. And also, it was tough to hire people over the last few years. So that's one of the reasons why productivity is not increasing. Second reason is we are not investing enough in technology compared to other countries. We are investing in technology per employee half what Americans are investing. And when we compare Canada, we always compare with the US because it's our trade partner. This is where we export. But if we compare ourselves with other developed economies, like the OECD countries, which include 30 different countries like France, Germany, UK, we are below the average. There's no reasons for that. We are sophisticated. We have a good education system. There's no reason for Canada not to invest more in technology. So your question is very good. We need to do something to increase our productivity, not only for the country, but for our own business. Every business owner should look at their productivity and should look at how they can improve it. Because if you're not as efficient as you should be, you leave money on the table. You're not as profitable as you should be. Often you hear that people have a cash flow issue. Well, a cash flow issue is often because there's some waste inside, some inefficiency inside the processes, inside the company. You're not producing as much money as you should. So cash flow problem is often a symptom of the low productivity. So businesses should look at productivity for themselves.
Super, thank you. And Jeanette to the back, yep. And then we'll come to the front. Where did Carol go? There we go. So we're at the back first.
Thank you for your speech so far. You have not mentioned anything about the Canadian dollar's weakness against the US. I understand that the lower it is for us as businesses, it is better for exports. But there's a third of us vacationers in Canada that in the next 4 months will be going outside of Canada for a vacation. At what level of lowness does the Canadian dollar have to go before business will stop it? So it's not, weakening too much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right. The dollar is low. It's this morning was 72 cents, and historically in the last 10 years the average was 75. So there was pressure down on the Canadian dollar because interest rates are reducing faster in Canada than in the US. The reason for that is the US economy is performing better than the Canadian economy. So the Fed is not, they have reduced the rate once, and they will probably reduce the rate depending on what Mr. Trump does, but there's no hurry for them to reduce the rate. The economy is performing very well. In Canada, the Bank of Canada is accelerating the cut. So we are expecting that our dollar will continue to go down. So don't be surprised in the next 6 months if the Canadian dollar is at the 70 cents, 7-0. And we don't expect the dollar to go much lower than that, but the pressure right now is down on the Canadian dollar. And in the next 12 months, we see the dollar closer to 70 cents than 75 cents. Like you said, it's good for our exporters. Not so good if you want to go to Florida for Christmas. But the good news, if you stay here for your holiday, you support the Canadian economy.
There was some pros to COVID, wasn't there? No one could leave because we are an export industry. When it comes to, we have a travel deficit larger.
Yes.
So, yes.
Have you
Adrian.
looked at what will happen if Mr. Trump goes through with his campaign promise to deport 13 million Americans, assuming most of them work? What's that going to do to hurt the American economy, and how many of them will come up here?
It will hurt the U.S. economy. The U.S. unemployment rate is 4.2%. They are full employment in the U.S. In Canada, the unemployment rate is 6.5. So 4.2 in the U.S. is low. So there's already full employment in the U.S. If you withdraw, some people said 11 million, some people said 13 million, that will actually create inflation in the U.S. So I don't think it will do it. It will do some of it. And think about it, to the mechanic or the processes you need to identify 13 million people and ask them to leave. It's huge. So I don't think he will do it. And it will hurt the US economy. Every economist are saying that. So I think he will do some. How much is going to be? 300,000, 500,000? I'm not sure. But it won't be 13 million. Because to your point, these people are working, sometimes illegally, most of the time illegally, but they are working. So if they're leaving, you need to replace them. And they don't have the manpower in the US to replace them. They are already at full capacity.
Thank you. Zeke, you're up.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Zeke from TD Commercial Banking. I'm just curious, if I read your graph properly, you're forecasting a drop to the overnight rate to about 2.5. Does that leave us enough room for monetary reaction to the next shock that we might see? Like, what's the floor?
It's a good, very good question. 2.5 is what the Bank of Canada called the neutral rate. And its neutral rate means that it's an interest rate that doesn't have a positive or negative impact on the economy. That's why that's their objective. You're right, it doesn't give you a lot of room to stimulate the economy if we have a recession. But in 2020, the interest rate before the pandemic was around 2.5, 2.75, and they brought the rate to 0 or 0.25, but almost 0. That's how they stimulated the economy. So, and it worked at that time. So that's why the Bank of Canada believed that their target should be around 2.5, which under their calculation is the neutral rate. So we believe, we're pretty confident they're going to go there. By the way, when they reduce interest rate, it doesn't really work. Last time, when they reduced interest rate, it created a major explosion in housing prices. I don't know if you remember, 2021, the average price of a house in Canada increased by 40%. In Ontario, it did increase by 60%. So lower interest rate doesn't stimulate business investment, doesn't stimulate increasing capacity. It stimulates the housing market, which doesn't create a lot of economic activities. But a very good question. I think the rate is going to go to the neutral rate at 2.5 or 2.75 in that range. I would be losing money next time.
I prefer 2.5 because I'm coming up eventually. Tori.
Thank you, Mr. Cleroux, for being here today. In 2022, you put there was a graph up that showed the baby boomer retirement. Today, you showed one that's 105. 2022, if I remember right, you showed the lines crossing. It was going to be for about 5 or 8 more years, I think you said then, that we were going to be in a large decline. It sat with me. It's hard to find labor, especially in Eastern Ontario. I think any of the people here, manufacturers, industry, we struggle to find labor force. Immigration numbers are going to go down. The graph didn't show the X today. It just showed the 105. So that one stuck with me. I'm curious what that percentage would be and for how much longer are we going to see it?
According to the Statistics Canada, they are the one who provide statistics on demography. It's going to be up to 2030, because in 2030, all the baby boomers will be gone. So the job market is going to rebalance. Like I said, there was always people leaving the job market. It was not the issue, and there's people who are coming in the job market, there's people who are leaving. The issue now is there's much more people leaving the job market. And this is only for a period of time. And we are in the middle of it. But by the year 2030, the situation should be rebalanced. But for the next few years, it means that it will be difficult to hire people. That's why there's no easy solution. Technology is one, automation is one. It's not you cannot replace a truck driver by a robot, but you can replace some tasks in the company by automation or technology. But this is what's happening right now is we're not unique, like other developed economies have the same issue, but it's more, it's bigger in Canada. There was more baby boomers, there are more people living at the same time. So it's, the situation is more acute here than in the US, for example. But all the developed economies have a similar situation. There's a shortage of labor everywhere. Yeah.
So Pierre, if you can just repeat his question so everyone can hear. Sorry, what's the...
Well, I'll just complete this. The last time I showed the percentage of people who are exiting and people who are entering, and we used to have more people entering than people exiting. Now it's the opposite. It's still the case, and it's going to be the case again for the next 5 to 6 years. After that, the curve should be realigned. But for now, the gap is still there.
Excellent. Carol, who do we have there?
Okay.
Oh.
It's William from Stevens Creek Decor, small retail business locally. When I look at the Canadian economy, I sometimes worry about the effects of climate change. And when we just recently in BC, terrible storms and the cost of those cleanups, and as a small business owner, the cost of my insurance, and so on, as you continue to get squeezed on costs. Is that in the economic, that uncertainty, how much do you see that affecting the economy in Canada as we go forward?
Yeah. Unfortunately, these events are good for the economy because people have to rebuild. People have to, protect something they build something to protect their business, but also, for example, we're going to build Jasper, which is good for the economy. But having said, this is, it should be the driver of what we do, we should, I believe, that's my personal opinion, we should really invest more as a country to protect ourselves against extreme weather events. We know now that we have more flood than ever before. We have more forest fire than ever before. Last year we had a record year, and the year before was a record year before that. So we need to prepare ourselves. We cannot prevent everything, but we can actually invest in protecting Canadians more against those events. This is going to be the case for the next decade. We're not going to slow down. Climate change is a reality, and it does have an impact around the world. And in Canada, the impact is not, sometimes it's too hot in the summer, but the real impact is flood and forest fire. So I think we should invest more to protect ourselves against that. Because like you said, the cost for those communities is huge, and the cost for business is huge. So in terms of the economy, it's not having a negative impact because people rebuild. But in terms of people and businesses, it does have a big impact. So I believe we should prevent those things. Some countries like Sweden, Norway, they have invested massively to protect their forests, and they can limit how a forest fire is spreading out. So you cannot prevent everything, but you can really reduce the damage. So I think that's what we should do as a country.
Thank you, Pierre. So if there's any last questions, we're only going to take a couple more, so we'll go over here with the next mic. But Pierre, I know Brett is in the audience. Do you want to introduce Brett? And then Brett can introduce the team.
Okay. Do you want to take the question first? Or?
No, we'll do this because we're going to take time to get there.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce, I have 3 colleagues of BDC here. So Brett, you're responsible for the Kingston office, and I will let you present your team.
Thanks everybody again, and Pierre, thanks again for making time. Just to give you an idea, Ann and I have been working on this, I think, since about January this year to get him. He's hard to pin down like a Taylor Swift concert. But we were fortunate enough to get him here. We did a session this morning in Kingston, and then this one this afternoon. This is always a big one for us. A great crowd comes out, good input from him, and Pierre is timely with him with some of the information that he provided. But so thanks, Pierre, for making time for me, the group here. With me today is Chris Gregoire, our manager, major accounts. Miriam Hussein up front here, account managers. Who else am I here? Dan Stevens from our Ottawa West branch. And earlier, Nick was here from our tech group, which I think he's left. But anyway, we're proud to be here, glad to be here. And thanks again, Anne, for putting this together and having us out. So,
thank you for getting Pierre for us. We appreciate it. We got one more question. Make it good, Doreen.
Oh, I hope so. Thank you very much. Is this on?
There we go.
Thank you very much. A very interesting presentation. I always look forward to hearing it. I know this may be a vicious cycle, and maybe you can tell me where it'll end up, but you acknowledged so many baby boomers, so many people going to retire, so many baby boomers with more in the bank account savings and more disposable income to spend on things. And so also we have decreasing job market and decreasing number of employees. And we know that robots don't contribute to pension plans. So down the road, who's going to fund all these pension plans? And so down the road, when the next generation is about to retire and don't have the same amount of savings because they've spent more along the way than we do, what's going to happen then? Are you preparing or thinking about that in the future? Thanks.
Thanks. I was hoping not to talk about this because I didn't want to conclude on a depressing note.
We'll take one more question then.
Oh, yeah. But you're actually on the pension side, I'm not too worried because the Canadian government and different provinces, they have reformed their pension to take care of the aging population. My biggest worry is on the healthcare. The healthcare system in Canada was built when we had a young population. 20 years ago, 12% of Canadians used to be over 65. Now we're 20%, and by the year 2030, we'll be 25% of Canadians will be over 65, 1 in 4. So the healthcare system was not built for that. It was built for a young population. So everywhere in Canada, every province, this is the talk of the town. And there's a shortage of nurses, of doctors, people are waiting for a long time. And the reason is because the system is built for a young population. I used to have a graph a long time ago. The cost of healthcare by age is really high the first year. Babies go to doctors often. Very low after that, and it's exponential at 65. So you can imagine if we have much more people who are over 65 using the healthcare system, this is going to be a challenge. It's already a challenge, and we're getting older. So I'm not sure what governments are going to do, but I can tell you in 10 years, our healthcare system will look differently than what it looks like, because we won't be able to afford the system we have now. The numbers doesn't match up.
So I will ask the last, so it's upbeat question. One of the things that I know my office has looked at is some of the BDC reports in regards to small business and the concern that was there in regards to the decline in entrepreneurship. But then in the last couple of years, we saw all of a sudden a spike of that coming back. Where do you see that happening? Where do you see it trending?
Well, Canadians don't create businesses as much as in the past. There's a number of reasons for that. The job market is really good. So people feel that, if they have a good opportunity on the job market, they might not take the risk of starting a business. Typically people start a business between 25 and 45. And this cohort is not increasing in Canada. What is increasing is 65 and more. Not a lot of people start a business over 65. But the good news is we have attracted a lot of immigration, and the number of people coming to the country or starting a business is much higher than Canadian. So that's what we have seen over the last few years. As there's more immigrants, there's more people starting business among immigrants. So the face of business owners in Canada is shifting. And we'll see more people coming from the rest of the world, more women, actually, much more than in the past, more from the diversified, landscape. For example, people who are coming from the Black community, from the Indigenous community, we see more entrepreneurship. So the entrepreneurship profile is shifting, will be quite different in the next 10 years. But we need entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs, new businesses, startups, they stimulate the economy, they innovate. To start a business, you need a new idea. Otherwise, you won't be able to make your place in the market. So we need those startups. A dynamic economy have a healthy number of startups every year.
Thank you. Wow. All I can say is what amazing Q&A. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, because you've just become like family here, we want to make sure that you're warm when you come back. And we want you to be an honorary patron of our summit in the way of the doormat, as I said, is always open. Thank you so much. And we're going to have a picture there. And of course, we couldn't let you go home without some goodies.
Oh, that's good.
Because we're very proud of our small businesses and the local goodies.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for all the great questions as well. It's a great event. So thank you.
Thank you.